Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Martin Frey, who has recently completed a world record, being the first person to sail the seven seas and summit the highest peaks on all seven continents. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Martin, we're thrilled to have you, and it's exciting to be able to talk to you after having set this incredible world record. But I'm most intrigued by your passion and desire to do more good in the world, and want to explore that a little bit with you and some of the lessons that you've taken from your experiences over the last 11 years in accomplishing these incredible feats, these great adventures, by applying them to social entrepreneurs. You suggested that your attitude will define your success more than your capabilities. What did you mean by that?
What I meant is that more important than the height or what you're trying to achieve or how steep the mountain you're trying to climb, your attitude will really be the biggest predictor of success. How determined you are in overcoming the obstacles that get in your way, how determined you are in thinking through the strategic planning that needs to come to mitigate risk and manage the risks for the challenges. And it's that raw determination that comes from deep within that really does, I think, ultimately determine how you play the game and how do you ultimately define who makes to their goal and who doesn't.
It is a fascinating lesson. And I wonder what you saw, because you must have seen, I think you mentioned on Denali, you were among 2 of 6 that made it to the summit. The other 4 didn't make it. And it seemed to me that was a powerful opportunity for you to see the difference between those that do and those that don't.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me to start to learn this mental game where those that were physically much stronger than I was, they had dragged sleds across Greenland and they had done these kinds of adventures. And yet at the same time, when the uncertainty and ambiguity of the situation created a lot of mental anxiety, they started to break down, and I think their mental breakdown then accelerated their physical breakdown. And at the same time, adapting to the situation and figuring out how to not force it and allow for the storms that came and everything else that hit us enabled us to ultimately be successful.
You also noted that when you're tacking into the wind, a great sailing lesson, you have to maintain momentum. And it took me a while to understand why it's important to maintain momentum. Tell us why it's important.
Well, whether you're climbing a mountain, you can't just go straight for the summit. You have to sort of zigzag, if you will, or what we call traverse up the mountain. And when you're sailing, sometimes you get to ride downwind, but most of the time you're orthogonal to the wind or you're even heading towards upwind, and you have to tack back and forth. And both of those analogies are important as we're have a summit or an objective that we've set for ourselves that we really, or our organizations that we want to go after. But you can't always get straight there. And those that try to go straight will lose their momentum because they're pointing too close into the wind. And so it's more important to get the boat moving and ultimately gain that momentum. And then when you do tack or traverse, that you don't stall out and that you carry through that pivot and enable yourself to head down the next path towards your ultimate objective.
When you're sailing and you make that tack into the wind, what happens if you do stall?
You go into what's called irons, and sailboats have a great challenge of getting out of irons. You basically have to go backwards a little bit to gain momentum backwards and then flip the tiller over to get the boat to catch the wind again. And so that is very analogous to how you have to get going rather than just trying to stay pointed to exactly where you're trying to get to.
That is a really powerful lesson for a lot of people. I really appreciate that. You talk about the need to constantly course correct as you go. Why is that important on the mountain? Why is that important at sea?
Well, think about it. If you're climbing a mountain, sometimes in order to succeed, like on Everest, you actually have to go down and acclimatize. You go up and you go down. You go up and you go down. And this idea of it isn't just a straight course, and that adapting to the situation as it comes. There's ice fall and rock fall, or you get cliffed out. All of these things become obstacles and challenges that you have to allow for the flexibility and the adaptability to get around the obstacle. And sometimes if we're too fixated on exactly getting to the summit without the ability to meander, then we get stuck and lose that momentum again.
Great lesson. Now, you talk about, you've got a really remarkable little anecdote you shared with the students at UVU at graduation this year, but you mentioned that you have to anticipate your transition. And you gave a great example of that, buying a sailboat while you were still on your skis as you completed the trek from summiting your 7th summit down in Antarctica. First, I want you to tell us a little bit about summiting in Antarctica, coming down and making this decision to buy a sailboat on your skis, and then a little bit about how that kind of thinking applies to us in other situations.
You know, I live in Utah, and I've gained a love of the mountains, and I've really enjoyed climbing, and one mountain led me to the next mountain and ultimately climbing the 7 summits. But I realized I have a family at home, and we have a handicapped daughter. And the idea of how do I meet my need for adventure while still doing the family thing and engaging my family and spending time with them, we decided on sailing. And the idea, while my handicapped daughter was still portable, to sail around the world if we could, or at least through the South Pacific. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to sail and get across the South Pacific, then there was a certain time horizon I had to do to avoid the typhoons. Well, I was off on a mountaineering expedition in Antarctica and cross-country skiing to the South Pole, and realized, I've got to get a sailboat purchased, provisioned, refitted, and everything provisioned, and us as a family trained in order to get through the Panama Canal and to Australia before the hurricane or the typhoons. And so all of that then started to go into the planning process, and I realized I had to move quickly even while I was still cross-country skiing.
Fantastic, fantastic lesson, and great adaptation to the family situation too. I really think that's great. Now, one of the things that you talked about with most passion, as we were talking a little bit in anticipation of this formal interview, was relentlessness. You talked about how you were relentless in solving problems, especially when you were at sea, sometimes thinking 2 or 3 ports ahead of what you'd need to do at that port and what you would need in terms of parts and supplies. Tell us a little bit about relentlessness.
Well, being relentless is about continually driving yourself to not just see the situation in front of you at any particular moment, but to anticipate what has to go together down the road. It's like a big chess game where you're thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead to ensure your success and ultimate outcome. And you're mitigating the variables that could get in your way or create challenges and obstacles down the road, particularly when time and moving forward quickly is key to enabling your ultimate success. And I think too often we just look at the short-term horizon in front of us and don't always anticipate what can we be doing today to prevent the problem next week, next month, next year.
Yeah, great point. Now, one of your most inspiring observations was your advice to climb the invisible mountains. What were you thinking about in that context?
Well, a good analogy is my dear wife, who has focused her work and energy and effort on service. In some ways, it's very a tangible mountain, some of the mountains I've climbed. But when I think of all the behind-the-scenes work that she does with children or seniors and disabled people, they're not the tangible outcomes that we often ascribe with starting a business or writing a book. And so those are invisible mountains that are just as significant and just as important in the work that we do to move forward, but oftentimes is unrecognized in some ways. And so we have to give ourselves credit for climbing invisible mountains and to find that they are as rewarding personally as some of the tangible feats that people do.
Yeah, interesting. Clearly, there are all kinds of things that people are doing that don't have the same claim to fame as climbing Everest, but many are still worthwhile.
That's right. And whether it's the work that goes on inside the home or in a community and all of that, as well as within various jobs and roles in different organizations. Sometimes the leader at the top ends up gaining the kudos, but it's some of the heavy lifting that happens deep within the organization that brings all of that together.
Yeah, I really appreciate these great insights. I have a couple more questions. I want to go just a little bit deeper, if we could, on the personal side. You clearly have become a role model to a lot of people, and you'd been a role model to a lot of people in business before, but who do you look up to as a role model? Who inspires you?
Well, as a child, I loved young man. I loved Jacques Cousteau. He was a key figure in my life in developing my love of the oceans and ocean conservation. When I think about leadership, I think about Shackleton and his ability to set out a vision, an objective, and to really lock onto that vision, and then engage a team to accomplish what he set out to do. And then when it didn't come together, he tried to be the first polar explorer in Antarctica to do a transcontinental trek across Antarctica. Then he adapted, and his next mission, when their ship goes crushed in the ice, had to be to rescue his 22 men and bring them all home safely. And the obstacles and challenges that they encountered in order to accomplish that, and how he never mentally allowed himself to get defeated, and yet he was confronted each and every time with insurmountable obstacles, and yet he found a way to overcome them.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you have made an interesting pivot, adjustment, course correction, transition in your life as you shift toward a greater focus on social impact. Why make that turn?
Well, I think it's about how can I make the most impact in society and do the most good for the most number of people. And as I thought about, different roles I could play, I've had a very wonderful career in Silicon Valley. I've had a wonderful career in economic development, and now thinking about how can we build this whole ecosystem here in Utah to improve the efficacy of nonprofits and enable them to be more effective in what they deliver, and how can I help enable them to be more successful in their endeavors. And so we're helping to support and provide the support infrastructure and align the capital to some of their worthy endeavors, as well as help make them more focused on their outcomes and things like that.
Terrific, terrific. I have one last question, and I realize you've given us 7 great points of light, 7 great lessons from the 7 C's and the 7 summits, but I wonder if you'd give us one last impact hack, one last tip that would help us to do more good in the world.
Well, I think it's, don't let the problems that confront you overwhelm your ability or your thinking that you can't make a difference in the world. I think to relentlessly pursue your vision of what you set out to do, and to keep tackling them day in and day out so that they don't consume your energy and or lessen the impact that you can ultimately do in making a difference in the world. Great are those individuals who do think they can change the world. And so keep that in mind and keep going for it.
Fantastic. Well, Martin, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I know you are available for public speaking, that people can hire you for that and other things, but take just a minute and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how people can connect with you professionally. Well,
we have a website, 7summits7cs.org, that people can contact us. We're focused on helping people achieve their goals and their dreams, and hopefully be an inspiration, as well as provide some of the methodology that has been successful. And at the same time, enjoy working with different organizations on whatever challenges they're confronting. And it's a pleasure to be with you today, Devin. I appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic. Really appreciate you being here with us, and we wish you every success in launching your new enterprises and building on your 7 C's, 7 Summit success.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Let's do some good.